How do we fight Amalek today? How do we do that? Do you have any ideas, any suggestions? Who's Amalek? How do we battle Amalek in this generation? Any thoughts, any guesses? Prayer, good. So are we talking about an actual people group anymore, or are we talking about something, a spiritual entity? Right, some would say that we don't know exactly who Amalek are today. It's not so easy to point to. But the sages have come up with the idea that Amalek represents doubt. So the word for doubt is Safek. It's the same gematria as Amalek. So anything that challenges our belief in God is Amalek. That's how the sages say today, in our time, we battle Amalek. So we're not throwing stones at people, on the side of the road. Okay, that was just a little sideline because I can't help but laugh at the timing Hashem has for this idea that I'm going through today. It relates to the gospel. It relates to this time of year, Purim, and actually today's special parsha. So I want to talk about a Midrash and how I've seen many times, and I know many of you have, you've studied Midrash, you're familiar with what Midrash is. The New Testament not only contains Midrash, it actually contains some of the earliest recorded appearances of the Midrashic tradition, which came later. Does everyone know what I mean when I say Midrash? Okay, good. Then we'll go through this then. Because I have a series on this, and I want to make sure I cover this before I jump into that series at some point in the future. Okay, Midrash, the word might sound familiar to you because it's where drash comes from. You could say it's a sermon. It's a homiletic sermon. It's the Jewish tradition that accompanies the Torah and is added to and expounded and expanded through the centuries. And you will notice that there are very popular Midrash. We have them on the back shelf over here. I encourage you to take some of them, especially the one I'm about to go through today. But you'll get an idea. You'll get a flavor for how the Jewish exposition works. You'll see in the New Testament the appearance of some of these Midrash. And I've studied them for many years. I've gone through the entire Midrash Rabbah. I was like an addict for Midrash. I just couldn't stop because I found so much there that informed and changed how I looked at the New Testament. It's often based on either an abrupt transition in the text, a word that's spelled differently, or some grammatical idiosyncrasy that is only found in one or two places. And it takes the Torah, which might to some people look like historical information, and it says, okay, here is how everyone can benefit from this. So what? We're going to battle Amalek, right? What does that mean today in 2022? The Midrash would give us that understanding. This is the later developed idea of Jewish hermeneutics. So most people today, when you're reading an English Bible, you're reading the Peshat. You're reading the plain, simple translation. We will see evidence of remez. Drash is absolutely pulled. Rashi uses Midrash a lot to make his Peshat understanding. So Rashi is in this space very heavily. Rashi, of course, is the giant, the sage who gives us the commentary, the Chumash. And then Sod we speak about, but we don't really dive into it too much because it really takes understanding how these work. And a lot of times when you come out of a Christian or even an academic understanding of the Bible, you have to kind of understand how these work. You have to kind of learn them anew. Yeah, Michael.
For this group, it's probably not as necessary, but for some people that sounds like all strange and so forth. There's a book you can get for your library. It's a little bit dry, but fascinating nonetheless. It's Richard Longnecker. What was it? Biblical Interpretation in Apostolic Times, and he documents from a Christian perspective the fact that pretty much everything that we're talking about today is in the New Testament. He goes through to great lengths to document every single, the use of Hillel's 7 laws of interpretation, the use of Peshat, Remez, Drash, and at the time Raz Pesher, which is mystery and interpretation, would have replaced Sod. So, and I just sort of say that because sometimes it does sound like we're going off the beaten path, but in fact, this is all 100% out of the New Testament's means of interpretation.
Can you repeat Longnecker's title, please?
Biblical Interpretation in Apostolic Times, as I believe it. That's off the top of my head, but
okay,
you'll find it.
So Richard Longnecker, Biblical Interpretation.
In apostolic time.
In
the apostolic period.
Okay.
That's where it's.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you very much for that. That's my endorsement that this isn't total heresy. I'll take it.
It's coming from me. I don't know that that's helping you.
I'll take it. Take it where you can get it. All of these are in the New Testament. In fact, like I said, some of the most wild, mystical explanations are assumed to be common knowledge in the New Testament. Unfortunately, we're not privy to that, so we see it and we have argued over these for centuries. Okay, so I showed this before. Now I'm going to switch and I've given the background of what we're getting into. We're going to look at Midrash in the New Testament and how it relates to this time of year. Also the holidays, and you remember this in the past, the holidays have a correspondence on the calendar. So in the case, we're coming up to Purim, and when I said this last time, we were at Yom Kippur. We're looking this way. Now we're going this way. We've made it halfway through. There are themes that are reversed in the holidays. So in Purim, it's very joyous, right? It's not so sober, as I said last time. It's a feast, bright costumes, and God is hidden. Yom Kippur is the opposite. It's very somber. It's sober. We don't drink anything. We fast. We dress in white, and we appeal to God. God's very much present. And then, if you look at what they have in common, both of them contain a judgment or a decree, right? That can be taken down the path of life or death. Both of them are a picture of redemption of Israel and the nations. So it's not just Israel. We're talking about a full, all tribes and the nations. And both of them are Messianic in their foreshadowing. Now you can say that about most holidays, but these two in particular are related. And that's where we are right now. We are coming up on the time of Purim. And of course, on the other side of that is Passover. So I want to look at what these have in common, because we're moving into this space of redemptions. They both are on the 14th. Now, this has changed slightly because we're in exile, and the very first Passover, we do things differently today. We don't paint the blood on the door. But I want you to keep these themes in mind, because this will come into play. Both of them are a type of redemption. Purim represents the redemption from exile. Passover is the first redemption. It's kind of the first time God takes the people out of Egypt and he makes them his bride, his kala, and we'll talk about that. Purim, God is concealed. We don't see the name of Hashem clearly. It's in there, it's hidden, but it's not plainly, it's not in the Peshat, the plain sense. In Passover, it's very different. We see clear miracles, obvious miracles. Everybody can see them. It's very, very obvious. So this is where we are now. We're coming up to this time where we are looking at the world and saying, I don't know, looks like Amalek's winning, right? God's work is concealed, you might say. Interestingly, the sages recognize that of all the holidays that will be removed when the Messiah comes, Purim is not one of them. Now, take this for what you will. This is rabbinic conversation. They recognize that the Megillah will also be at the level of the 5 books. Now, why is that? Why would Purim, or the book of Esther and Purim, why would that be such an important holiday into the Messianic era? Any thoughts? Anyone read that before?
It's in the Siddur. We prayed it today at the end of the Musaf prayer, that all idolatry and all evil would be quenched and it's returned back to a pure state.
His name is one. Right. So Purim it's an often overlooked holiday. It's often misunderstood as the day of drinking and costumes, and those are fun for sure. But the essence of Purim is that it is a worldwide redemption. It's the time when the Jewish people are about to be destroyed, and everything reverses amazingly to the point where people then become part of the nation. And it's celebrated throughout the land, throughout all time. It's very Messianic in that regard. That's why it retains its place of power in the Messianic era. And this is very reassuring, because this is how Esther kind of wraps up, getting towards the end of Esther here. The same month which had been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. So we're seeing in this, there's an idea that things can turn around in a blink of an eye. Even when you look at the world, you look at the news, you look at the events, and you say, there's no way this is good or this is going anywhere. This verse should be the verse we keep in our pocket at this time. Okay, so customs between Purim and Passover. Many communities will study the Midrash because there is Esther Rabbah. I think we have that over there too. Esther Rabbah and Song of Songs Rabbah. I would honestly check with Danny and take one of those out. I don't know how many copies we have, but it's worth looking at. Or you can go to Sefaria.org. They have these as well. It's worth your read. And what's a little known, but maybe we do it here. I wasn't here for Passover last year. People read Song of Songs during Passover around that time. And there are different traditions on when you read it. But Song of Songs, why would we read Song of Songs? It's kind of a weird book, right? What do you think? Any guesses?
Love, and you're almost like a bride, and that's what Israel was like. When God took us out and at Sinai, we became His people. Really, we're official people in a way. So, and I would say it's like you're becoming like a marriage.
Wonderful. So did everyone hear that? It's picturing the marriage between God and, but that's not a plain level meaning, right? It's not really plain. To us, it might be, but. This is again where we read the Peshat, we read the plain, and we kind of miss that other story that's being told. Maybe it's midrashic or mystical. I've even heard. Actually, I would say I would call that midrashic because the mystical is a total different thing. But nonetheless, we're seeing that there are ways of looking at the Torah. You turn it over one way, and it's a love story. You turn it another way, and it's telling something very big. Rabbi Akiva saw this. In the discussion between the rabbis, they said, this book doesn't make sense here, right? And they had a couple books they were arguing over, but a lot of the rabbis spun around this book. What does Song of Songs? And maybe it's just a conversation for the sake of us thinking about it. I don't know if it actually happened. Maybe it did, but let's just say it did. Rabbi Akiva says the greatest day was when Israel received Song of Songs. The entire universe is unworthy of the day this book was given to Israel. All the writings in Scripture are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. So he's putting it on. He just, that's a really powerful statement, right? He just put that, dare I say it, one of the most important books of the entire corpus. Does that make sense? So this is what we're talking about. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you have to really look at it, but Song of Songs is fundamentally about a bride who, was basically approached by the king. Nobody believes her. Everyone's telling her she's an idiot, and she's waiting in vain. But she waits faithfully until her husband comes for her. And so, I can just imagine Akiva, dealing with the fallout of the Bar Kokhba revolt and so forth, looking at Israel as in the same position. Nations are saying, you're dumb. Why don't you follow the other gods? Why are you still waiting when your temple is now in ruins and we've conquered you and everything else? And so for Akiva, particularly living in that time, you could see why he would look at the promise in the Song of Songs to be, or the Song of Solomon, to be very ultimately poignant. I guess is the way to put it.
Okay.
I think Rabbi Akiva can say that because to me, he's one of the sages that always tends to live in Sod. That's just his way of thinking. So of course to him, that's what it looks like. Where most of us would look at it and say, I don't quite always see what he's saying there.
Right. Rabbi Akiva, his student was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's often associated with the Zohar, the volume of the Zohar. And I have a number of other amazing teachers. But what I grabbed from this is that things aren't what they seem on this planet of ours, right? Things look a certain way and they may not be at all like that. It's just how we see it. We see an upside-down world, the sages call it, and Yeshua says, the last will be first and the first will be last. That comes from that same idea. That we're in a world, as the rabbis call it, the world of lies. Okay.
It's very, some of us see it, but in this statement it's very prophetic. So we go from historically reading through the Song of Songs of the rejection, coming back, the marriage, the ups and downs, but by placing it in the Holy Holies, we go past we go from the point of our prayers being offered up like incense to being in the presence, the Shekinah, which is between the cherubim of the ark. So we're talking about the world to come. And we go where the sun never sets. The light is always on. We move from one stage to the next, and it's really the world to come when we talk about it in this stage.
Yeah, it's the intimacy that exists beyond space-time. It's something we've never experienced. Okay, so let me move forward. This is really good because I just want to kind of lay the foundation of what we're getting into. We're now going to look at how this stacks up against the New Testament. In reading this a few years ago, I saw something that stood out to me. A friend of mine and I spoke about it, and recently I've had the chance to kind of go through and pull this information and see what we're looking at. And I've done this many times. In fact, I have a book that I was planning on putting out. I don't know who the audience would be, and Peter, you could tell me if you don't know what that is, and you might as well fold it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release some of these here because I think that they are powerful. I think it lets us understand the brilliance of the New Testament, the authors in the New Testament. We'll see not only is this a Jewish book, this is an incredibly deep Jewish book of which some of these traditions, which later became available in print, are living and breathing in the New Testament. And I think it'll radically change how we read the New Testament. It won't be simply, that happened 2,000 years ago. We'll see how that matters today in our lives right now. Okay, so with this in mind, I want to take a look at the healing of the woman and Jairus' daughter. And I'll read through this. And there came a man named Jairus. I'm going to call him Yair. That's his Hebrew name. So he was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Yeshua's feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Yeshua went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. And immediately the issue ceased, the discharge of blood ceased. And Yeshua said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Yeshua said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that the power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, and declared in the presence of all the people why she touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Yeshua, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe." That's emunah, right? That's that word we spoke about a few weeks ago. But Yeshua, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James. I don't know why I have Hebrew and English in there. And the father and the mother of the child. All were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what happened. Okay. We're all familiar with that story, right? Pretty sure we've heard that many times. Okay. Key points I'm going to look at. Timing of the story. Yair. Who is he? Yair's daughter. The woman, we'll call her the Nidah, right? I'll talk about that in a second. The garments. What's important about this garment? The fringe. And the statement "rise up." This is very interesting, all this here. So moving into this, if you look at all of the gospel accounts where this happens, it exists in all but John. But in the gospels where it exists, the next chapter is the feeding of the 5,000. So I know chronology is a little shaky, but we're going to go with that. John tells us in his, I think I went too far ahead. Okay, John tells us in his where the feeding of the 5,000 is. And the feeding of the 5,000, I'm sure many of you know, is very deep with Passover. It's rich with Passover imagery. So I'm going to use John's timing because John is very much focused on the holidays. He tracks along the holidays, and all of them are in one way or another accounted for. So John tells us this is before Passover. So we're talking about the time we're in now. Okay? John gives us a really good idea. of where this falls. Okay, Yair. Wait, I don't know what happened. Oh. Okay, so I'll just go off my slide until this comes back up. Jairus, as people know it in the Greek, is Yair. He was a ruler of the synagogue. If you look for that name in the Bible, right? So go ahead. Right, how would you? Where do you find it? Mordecai's father. So this connects us with Esther. The name automatically, when you put it back in its Hebrew, it connects us with let me see, get my slide here. It connects us with Esther. Sorry, okay, here we go. Okay, so here we are. So now we've jumped. It's around the time of between Purim and Passover, and now this connects us with Esther, the story of Purim. Okay, keep these. Don't try to memorize these. I can make this available. You can watch it back later. Just kind of keep it a loose idea of what's building here. These connections. They're not accidental. I don't think they're accidental. Okay, that connects us to the story of Esther, which is where Purim comes from. Esther is interesting because Esther is known for, and actually we read the Haftarah today, Esther is known for saving the nation of Israel, specifically Israel, not the Jewish people, Israel. As it says in Esther Rabbah, the Midrash we read around this time, Esther who arose for Israel in their exile. So this is interesting, right? We're now being connected with Israel and Purim. And how do we know that it was just Israel she saved? Well, Mordecai tells us. Mordecai said, "Don't imagine that you of all the Jews, those of Judah, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews, the Yehudim, from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish." Right? And that's the famous passage you're here for a time. Is this the Haftarah today? They failed to kill the Amalekites. They then became the nation from which Haman came. So Israel had a rectification to make because of the failure of Saul, who was from the tribes of Israel. So we're told, Purim, Israel in exile, all of this is a connection to the word Yair. Right? This is how the Midrash works. They'll take a word and they'll continue to pull these themes.
They're also from the same tribe.
Right.
So it's the failure of the tribe and the redemption of the tribe.
100%. So if you didn't hear that, the failure of the tribe, and this is one of those mystical concepts, you can bring a rectification for something your tribe did earlier. God allows that. It's from the same tribe here. Okay. So just through the flag word, as I was taught in yeshiva, Yair connects us to all of these themes of Purim and Esther and Israel in exile. Very deep is how they do this. Now we're looking at the daughter. His daughter was about 12 years of age, and this is what caught me first. 12 years of bleeding, 12. It's an obvious allusion to the 12 tribes. What do we do with that? Look at the Midrash, Song of Songs, Rabbah, and when it gets to this passage in Song of Songs, it says, "Therefore maidens love thee." And the rabbis say, well, why do the maidens love thee, God? The word for young girl, often interchanged with daughter, the word for young girl is alma. That's a very powerful word. Many of us have probably argued this word in other contexts. I don't have time for that today. But alma it's a powerful word. I'll just say it often means young woman. Almot is the plural of that. So maidens, young women, however you want to translate that, the rabbis say, okay, here's why the maidens love God. Because he has hidden, he'alamta, hidden, so just playing on that word, if you could see the Hebrew, it would be more clear. He has hidden the day of death from them. And then another one, he will guide us above death. So playing on the word for maiden, young girl, the rabbis connect the idea of being saved from death. Right? And that's what we're going to see with the daughter. She's saved from death. It's very deep. Make sense so far? You tracking? Okay. Okay, back to the woman. The woman interrupts this situation, right? We're supposed to be healing the daughter, and all of a sudden the woman's in the picture. 12 years of this issue. This is a big deal for her because she is cut off from intimacy, relationship, marriage. This is a terrible, terrible place to be by the Torah, that all the days of the issue of uncleanness, you will be a separation. This is fascinating because on the plain level, the Peshat level, I'm going to go back and forth here. On the plain level, Leviticus is telling us this is what you do with somebody who has an issue like this. On a deeper level, though, and we'll see this here. Okay. This would mean that on a deeper level, this person is spiritually unfit, right? As long as this blood, this impurity is here, they're unfit. This idea exists in the Midrash. It looks at Ezekiel, where Israel is described as a nation that's wallowing in blood. Why? Because of their participation in idolatry. And if you read Ezekiel 16, and much of Ezekiel, and the prophets, this is a very common theme. Remember, Israel is a bride, as we said earlier. That's what Song of Songs is about. If the bride's unfit, the bride can't be near the husband, the bridegroom. So Israel in Ezekiel is in that state. So the Midrash calls that out and says Israel's in this state of nidah. Israel, the nation, the people, are unfit. Okay, this is very common. We see this in Lamentations. Jerusalem has greatly sinned, therefore she has become a nidah. Right? You tracking? Okay. We see this also in another verse in Ezekiel. We see they defiled it with their ways and their deeds. Their ways were in my sight like the impurity of a nidah. So we're seeing that on a low level, this woman is in a state of nidah. But the bigger picture that we're seeing around Israel in general is that they too are in a state of nidah. Right? This is a very common theme when you read it on these other levels. Sadly, this woman had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors. She spent all she had. Right? It kind of talks about it kind of connects with me for the prodigal son. I hate to bring other concepts in, but it's kind of like that. You've gone out and you've done all you can. You haven't gone to the right physician, but you've done all you can. And I like Mark's version because it tells us it got worse. Wouldn't you know? Midrash Song of Songs talks about the same thing. When the people were being redeemed, they only needed one thing. They needed faith in God. That would redeem them. But instead, they went everywhere else. They went to all the gods of Egypt, as the Midrash says. They were, and this is from the Midrash, they were like a man who suffered with his feet and went around to all the doctors and couldn't find a cure. So do you see how this Midrash is connecting step by step with all the elements of this gospel story? And of course, I would say, does anyone want to guess who the doctors are? Any guess to who are those doctors, metaphorically? Pagans? Okay. Pagan gods, yep. I would say, yeah. Idolatry, shamanism, right? You've gone to everybody else, Israel. You haven't come to me, God's saying. All right, so if we're good, we're good. Okay. When you start to read the Midrash, these things they'll click. You'll see these. You'll see them all over the New Testament. Okay. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her issue ceased. Now, we've all argued that before, right? Did Yeshua wear tzitzit? Have you ever been in that debate before? Early on? Most people say, no, he didn't. There's no possible way. Historically, it would seem that he did. Well, interesting. The English will take this word fringe, and it'll say the corner of the garment. It'll say the hem of the garment. The word in Greek is kraspedon, and it means fringe. Fringe, once you add fringe to the mix, it's clearly tzitzit. And I'll tell you why that matters in a second. Song of Songs 2:6 talks about this person, the beloved, coming to the wife and let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. Well, the sages, when they're reading this and expounding on it, they reference the fringes, the tzitzit. They're making a reference to tzitzit. And the reason is, tzitzit are a sign. In the Midrashic tradition, tzitzit are a sign of Torah. In fact, through the way the rabbis work out the gematria, the numeric value of the word, and the garment, it equals 613. So it's a sign for Torah. So somebody who keeps the Torah perfectly, somebody who is a righteous person, a holy person, would be wearing tzitzit, or at least you don't have to be perfect, but the person who they're talking about here will be that person. They'll be perfect, and they'll be able to bring a healing because of that connection to God. You track with what I'm saying?
It also identifies the person. The tzitzit are specific. And usually, many people have talked about it's probably the right front kanaf that on that tzitzit, because that was specific to him.
Yeah. So he just said something powerful. This identifies. This is an identifier. The way Midrash works, it's going to pull these themes that people would be familiar with, and it's going to keep dropping them like breadcrumbs in the story. So it's unfortunate that the English will take that word and reduce it to anything but fringe, because it removes the identifier. Now who are we talking about? If it's not tzitzit, it could be anybody. This gets better. Stay with me. It feels kind of weird going through it this slow. Maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe it's not necessary, but hopefully it's valuable to you. So I'll do this. Let me make sure I'm on the right one. Okay, good. This is where it gets pretty amazing. After healing the little girl, the young woman, the Alma, the word changes. It does say young girl, it says daughter, it says a couple things in these verses. He said to her, Talitha kum, which means young girl, rise up. Right? In Song of Songs, there is a particular moment when the beloved comes and says to Israel, on the Midrashic level, or to the woman on the Peshat level, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. Right? Says the Midrash, my beloved spoke and said unto me, quoting that verse. He spoke through Elijah, because spoke comes first. Whenever there's a duplication of words, the rabbis will often assign two different events to that. He spoke, so Elijah comes first. He spoke through Elijah. And he said through Messiah. What did he say to me? What did Messiah say to me? Rise up, my love, my fair one, come away. In the language, it's exactly the same. It's rise up, Talitha kum. It's a very deep concept. You see what's being said here? So this woman's in a bad state. She is incapable of removing herself from this state. It's going to take someone who is a righteous person, who has that level of connection with God, to bring that healing. And when that person comes, how do we know it's him? The tzitzit will give it away, and he will say, rise up. So we see that in the Gospels, all three Gospels. This is the part where the women are now given a different label. You will know, whenever you see Zion, daughters of Zion, you're talking about redemption. There's a rabbinic way of looking at the word. They don't say Jerusalem has been redeemed, they'll say Zion. Right? We'll call it Zion. It's kind of it's a marker for a redemptive turn of events, we'll call it. Song of Songs, Rabbah says, go forth, O ye daughters of Zion. We've seen this before. Israel, the nation, are compared to a female. They're also compared to a daughter and a bride in the Midrash and in Song of Songs, in the plain sense. The gospel writers know this. We see this when Yeshua is in the triumphal entry. He says, quoting Zechariah 9:9, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey. This in itself is a massive Midrashic tradition. Very deep, this whole thing. We could spend a week on that. We won't, but you could. So they know daughter of Zion is the turning point of when a redemption is taking place. A gate is opening. No longer are we in this state that we can't rectify. Something is changing cosmologically, metaphysically, that is moving us into this place of Zion. There's a redemption starting. And we see this when the woman is healed. He calls her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Daughter, your emunah has made you well. So throughout this Midrash, we've seen that faith is the key. That's what it takes. It takes having that faith that this redemption can come, and this will make you well. And the woman's healed. All three Gospels, this is the way it's phrased. Very specifically, daughter. This idea also is in the prophets. We see this in Hosea. Very challenging book to read. But when you look at the Midrashic level of it, he will heal their affliction generously. I will take them back in love. So it's temporary. This state that they're in, it's just a temporary state. He will take us back. He'll heal the affliction. The tzav, right? There's a couple ways of looking at that word, but nonetheless, I'll heal the separation between us. Again, Ezekiel 16, you'll remember and feel shame. You'll be too abashed to open your mouth again when I have forgiven you for all that you did, declares the Lord. So this will be such an amazing, and this is for us too. And also to kind of remember this is in our day and age too. We have equal opportunity to this. Things will change so quickly from an unexpected place that we won't know what to say. It'll go from a month of mourning to festive joy, like that. But it's fascinating because when the woman, if you read the gospel, when the woman acknowledges, when she finally has to acknowledge what she did and why she did it, she describes that she had faith that this would happen. And she falls down and she can barely speak, right? So that even this element's captured in the Gospels. She's just overcome with joy. She can barely speak because of all that happened to her, the healing. Okay. So we went through this. Timing of the story is before Passover, so it's kind of around the time of Purim and onward. The heir connects us to Esther. The daughter and the woman, the girl, we don't have a name for her, and the woman, also later called daughter, they represent the nation of Israel. This is the way I'm reading this gospel story. And we find that in Song of Songs, Midrash, and the prophets. The garment is also part of the Midrashic tradition, and it's a symbol of beginning redemption, and it's a symbol of Torah. Somebody who's keeping the 613 commandments, as we spoke about through the Gematria of Tzitzit. And it's going to be the Messiah who tells us through these words, rise up, that this is what's happening. And it's fascinating because you think about it real quick. At the very end, last thing, I didn't make a slide for this, but when the gospel story, I think it's Mark, when the woman is healed, the story goes off into the land. It's told all throughout the land, which could also be an allusion to Esther as well, because that's how the decree is reversed, and Esther sends a message out through all the land. Yeah, all the provinces, that's right. Okay, we ready to solve the puzzle? Putting it all together. Here's what I see in this. We have time. Yeah, we have some time for questions too. Okay, here's what I see. The heir's daughter is very near to death, and she actually does die, if you follow the story, but she's restored. He and his daughter connect us with the book of Esther, a prominent Messianic theme book that features the diasporic tribes of Israel facing imminent death. In an amazing, unseen, and almost unbelievable reversal, they are restored to life by a Messianic figure who was concealed up until that moment. In rabbinic tradition, this is significant, as it foreshadows the final redemption, the opening of the era of repentance and faith, one that also will include the nations eventually. The woman in this gospel story, she's in a state of tumah, impurity. She's in a state of separation, nidah. She's found among the crowds, and to me, the crowds represent exile, right? We don't know who the crowds are. We could kind of maybe come to who they may be. But she's among the crowds. She's Israel in exile, lost among the crowds, passed over, wallowing in her situation as the Midrash points. Her impurity caused this separation, right? It's the cause of it. She can't do anything about it. It resembles the reality of the tribes of Israel, of whom Yeshua came specifically to reunite with. Through their engagement in idolatry, as the prophets tell us, this is their situation. They have no chance of turning this around. The many physicians, in my understanding, are the various nations' deities who they wrapped themselves up in and got involved with. And the Avodah Zarah, the idol worship. Upon healing the woman and restoring the young girl, both are called daughter. They're connected by that name, daughter, and they're also connected by the number 12, which is an allusion to the 12 tribes of Israel, the restoration of the tribes, which leads to the restoration of the world. She's told to rise up, which in the Midrash tells us will be the words Messiah offers to the person to Israel when they're being healed. This healing and restoration we see in the Gospels is more or less flagging to us that something is happening on a higher level with the nation of Israel. As often Israel is called bride, daughter, and kalaz is the beautiful word you see very often in Song of Songs. This same theme is also seen in many prophets. God is telling Israel and the world through Israel that you're no longer stuck in this position. You're no longer left to wallow in this reality. I'm here. This era is opening and it's changing. And I'm redeeming you and I'm making you a bride again. It's a big story. We do this. Yeah. So why does it matter? So if this is simply a story on the Peshat level of something that happened 2,000 years ago, we don't have much we can do with that today, right? If we don't understand that there's a homiletic takeaway for this story, if we don't see that, then we may overlook probably the biggest message in the gospel story. Using this Midrash allows us to point to something greater. We learn that the era of repentance and emunah, and the end of hopeless impurity, separation, that era has been ended, right, 2,000 years ago. With emunah and trust and action, we can be restored even in our own time, even in situations where death looks imminent, or it appears that God is nowhere to be found, like in the book of Esther. He's nowhere to be found. Yet, if we have emunah, we will recognize that he is working behind the scenes, and he is present at all times. And for some reason, this is the reality for us, that we don't see that for some reason. But we know through the book of Esther, through this story in the gospel, life and healing can happen out of nowhere in the blink of an eye, and a time of mourning can be turned to a time of rejoice. That's what I see. Curious to take any questions. If you see it, go back through those stories. I'm curious what you see. Maybe you find something to add to it. But I think that's where we are today. I think we're in a time when things look pretty dismal. But we need to always remember that verse in Esther 9:22, that things can turn around in a moment. And we don't have to expect it or see that coming for it to be true.